Very good evening to all our viewers. Welcome all. I am Kumar Abhinash, and I'm the founder and CEO of CMI. And with me, I have Aditya. First of all, before starting, a very hearty welcome to all. And I hope you and your family are keeping safe in these difficult times. Starting with our guest today, Aditya started Centlytics as a summer project in his Stanford dorm room. He brings in a rich background of highly technical skill set tied up with a sharp business acumen, and he was able to jumpstart Centlytics and bootstrap it within 2 years. And all of this while he was completing his master's from Stanford. So before jumping on to my questions, uh, Aditya, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so hi Avinash, thank you for inviting me to the webinar. Really nice to be here. Nothing to add, thank you so much. So Centlytics is, been a promising journey for me so far. Been doing it for about 4 years now, and still going strong, still growing at a steady pace. So always good to be a part of such discussions and conversations. So love to be here.
That's wonderful. Speaking about your team and the business, how are you navigating Centlytics through all these tough times during the COVID-19 era?
Well, these are unprecedented times, and the fact that anyways, I'm very new in the career and in the industry. I don't think I would be knowing exactly what I'm doing is right or wrong. But I basically have taken a three-step approach. So for me, our people, our colleagues are number one. Number two, we want to take care of all our customers, and lastly, all our vendor relationships. So we've tried to make sure that we have enough business continuity, that we're not letting go of people. We're doing our best to make sure that everybody gets paid on time. These are tough times, so I must say that we don't have the luxury of long ramps for new employees, and hiring is definitely slowed down. But definitely, as a team, we're still very united, and doing our best, doing great work, even while being remote. Customers, we've become a lot more flexible. So, the customers renegotiating contracts. We're trying to see what we can do best to help them also survive these times. I think that is the most critical for every business, is to help each other. And the same is for the vendors, right? What can we do with them? How can we work better so that at the end of the day, once we come out of this, we all have the best possible way to reach back to normal. So definitely unprecedented times, but I think if we can all work together, I think we all will definitely come out, and that's the power of humanity.
That's a wonderful thought, Aditya. And before jumping on to my questions, I'd like to tell all our viewers today that we'll have a Q&A session after the webinar gets over. So feel free to drop any questions or any comments you have on the comment section on the YouTube, and we'll address each and we'll try to address most of them. Thank you. So Aditya, coming back to you, dealing with your portfolio of clients on the cloud, you're the best person to ask these questions, right? So do you think the pandemic era is putting strains on the cloud capacity?
Well, to a certain extent, I think one of the great examples is the adoption of Microsoft Teams. You've seen what's going on with Zoom and all the other such digital workplace solutions. So definitely there is a certain amount of strain, the cloud market is seeing, the data centers are seeing. But I think they were always over capacity because of the cloud era. So I think they're able to handle this elasticity. And I think that's also the power of cloud. I think that's where people are really realizing that the traditional data centers are just not able to scale at the same pace that a cloud data center is able to. So there is strain, but I think that it's being managed really well by all the cloud vendors.
Perfect. So how do you think the organizations are leveraging the cloud technology during this pandemic?
Well, there are two parts to it. There are people who are already on the cloud. For them, nothing has changed, which in such a pandemic is itself a very big achievement. The fact that your business continuity is not hampered, your infrastructure is still up and running, your people are able to work from home. So those customers, those cloud users are extremely happy that they made the move early. People talk about disaster recovery as being a one-off. Well, this is one of those times where having a disaster recovery plan, being available, highly available, has really paid off. The other side, when people were not fully ready, I think they're now extremely rapidly moving, specifically starting with some of their key workloads. So there's a lot of conversation happening around virtual desktops and VDI solutions, and how do you enable people to work from home, give them access in a secure, authenticated fashion. So I think that's the main change that we're seeing happening on both sides right now.
That is so true. And absolutely true that this pandemic has led us to believe that a lot can be achieved, and a lot can be achieved remotely, even without involving everybody in the office under the same roof, right? And I've read a lot of news recently that a lot of IT organizations are claiming that by 2025 they can almost have 75% of their employees work from home, right? And that's one of the innovation and one of the new things that we're testing right now. And how do you think the pandemic is making organizations innovate?
That's a great question, right? So yes, a lot of the system integrators and all the technology companies are saying that people can work from home a lot more. And I think that's just going to become a thing of the future. I think people are going to be used to social distancing, having to work remotely, being enabled to work remotely. And those things will be very critical. So from an innovation point of view, we are seeing all kinds of stuff happening, right? People are, people who are in cost trains are taking some very innovative measures to do cost optimization. There are people who have security concerns, and all of a sudden they have these innovative ways of providing secure connections to the work from home employees and work from home people. There's a lot of stuff happening around BYOD, right? Because all of a sudden there's a lack of hardware in the market, and people who used to use desktops or any on a non-movable equipment, all of a sudden a BYOD is coming in, and that comes up with all its own restrictions, constraints, and how do you manage access control, etc. So a lot of great innovation happening. We're also seeing some great startups come out of this. The drone startup that is sanitizing remotely. There is healthcare startups coming up. So, I think to every dark side, there's a silver lining. I think there is definitely good stuff happening in these times as well.
That is true. So what I've seen is basically the pandemic somehow has enforced digital transformation on these enterprises, right? So what do you think was the barrier of entry before this, or the skepticism towards a digital first approach?
Well, there was a lot of factors to it. So one example being security. People always found it more secure when something was tangible in their own data center. They could go and actually check it out. In this lockdown, in this non-movable era, all of a sudden cloud seems a lot more easy to work with. So security was one of the concerns, which now people are realizing that probably cloud was more secure because in these times they are fully operational. Second great example is loss of control, right? Okay, this is my data center. I can go fix a disk or change up a virtual machine if something goes wrong. Again, you cannot go to your data centers. You cannot access the physical hardware. So once again, the cloud does seem like a pleasant choice. I think cost benefit analysis was always happening. I always say that cloud is not always going to be cheaper. There are cheaper ways to do it on-prem, but now people are realizing that for that incremental cost, the value add is also exponential. So if we can pay that little bit extra on an ongoing basis, but get this business continuity, get this prevention, and get this sort of disaster management capabilities, I think it might just be worth it. So you're absolutely bang on, right? This is forcing companies into digital transformation. If somebody didn't know or didn't think about cloud back then, they're definitely thinking about it now.
That is true. And sometime back we spoke about the rising strain on the cloud infrastructure. Do you think a lot of organizations are facing something known as a cloud sprawl?
Cloud sprawl is a reality. So it comes in from the idea that you're no longer in a capex model when you're doing capacity planning and it's capital expenditure. You think of it like a one-time expense, and then you don't relook at it. Cloud sprawl becomes a reality because cloud comes with all its tiny nuances. You're individually being charged for every incremental ingredient, if I may use that word. So I often give the example of ordering in a buffet. It's very difficult because now this buffet is being charged based on the weight of the food and not just eat as much as you like. So that slight difference makes the complete difference happen, where you're paying for every gigabyte of data, you're paying for every single IP, you're paying for every GB of storage. So it becomes slightly different, and it's basically creates this techno commercial era where just knowing technology is not good enough. You have to understand the commercial behind it, the finance behind it, to be able to make these decisions. So definitely cloud sprawl is for sure a reality.
So what I understand is a lot of people are struggling to control their infrastructure, right? If I'm not wrong.
Absolutely, right. So it comes back to the similar kind of an idea. So if I spent this money upfront, right, you gave me this idea that you're going to buy this, and this is the cost for it. You're going to pay me 10 lakhs, and that's about it. It's easy, right? I pay you 10 lakhs and I use it the way I want. But in cloud, it's converted into operational expenditure. So the mindset has to be changed. Cloud IT was always procured with a capex mindset, and that's what's creating the trouble for the IT folks and the industry to start looking at it from an operational point of view. Just like you would be managing your cost centers, your salaries, your marketing budgets, your sales budgets on a monthly, weekly basis. That's literally how you need to be managing your IT costs now. And that change in methodology, obviously, is creating a lack of control, and people are scrambling to look for different ways to make that control happen. That's the idea for a CMP. That's the idea for cost management. That leads to the idea of all these governance frameworks that are coming in on how do I keep day-to-day control on my overall cloud sprawl.
So what are the best methods to control your infra then,
Well,
to get out
it's
of this
it's not a
cloud
one
sprawl per se, as we discussed?
it's not a one cap fits all kind of a method. I think based on where you are, what part of the cloud journey you're in, the approach might vary, but you most certainly have to have some framework, some methodology of managing it. So if you're really small, I think an Amazon or Azure console itself gives you just the right amount of information. It tells you what are you running, what are you paying for it, and you are aware about those bills. As you start getting larger and larger, you might want to start putting some kind of a basic budgeting framework, bring in some kind of a cloud management platform, or maybe do some in-house API management to start letting as you start reaching closer and closer to your budgets. And the minute you cross that slight mark of, let's say, $2,000 $3,000 of monthly spend, where you are now talking production, you're talking serious money, or you want to make sure that you actually have proper governance frameworks, approval cycles, making sure that resources can't just be provisioned and deprovisioned based on an engineer's will, but mostly going through a full cycle, just like it would in the previous era, but at the same time, keeping in mind that now there's a commercial cost attached to it. So bringing in those right policies and frameworks is very critical, just like you would in any other department as you continue to scale and grow.
Right. And mentioned CMP as one of the methods to control your infra. And Centlytics is perhaps a CMP. And how can organizations leverage Centlytics, and it is a SaaS-based CMP, to manage their cloud infrastructure?
Well, cloud management has multiple aspects to it, and when you're looking for a CMP, you got to know what all are you looking for. So you're talking about cloud visibility, which is where the first thing you want to do is just know what exactly are you running. You don't care about how to optimize it. You don't care about how secure it is. Just somebody to come and tell you this is what you're doing on the cloud. That's the first key aspect of a good CMP. Second, you've got to figure out, okay, now that I know what I'm running, can somebody tell me how to really optimize it? What are the different places I'm losing money? And, how can I make that change happen? So that's going to be critical, again, from an optimization perspective. Security is another key component to cloud, right? Cloud is extremely secure. It's inherently secure, but it does have a lot of loopholes where you could make it insecure. There are about 600 different places where you might do something which opens up your cloud infrastructure to security exposure, security breaches. So making sure that your CMP can do your security compliance management is another very critical piece. I think the last important piece to worry about is automation and provisioning. How do you make sure that it helps you in your day-to-day cloud management, the day-to-day IT administration? So things like, upgrading your VMs, downgrading your VMs, changing the disks that are attached, OS patching, things like that. So if there is anything which can help you do your day-to-day cloud management, I think that's another critical piece. And Let me complete this answer by saying that you might not need all of this, or you might actually be needing more than this. But somewhere or the other, you're in between this journey based on how big your IT landscape is and how big your IT teams are, and what level of complexity are we looking at from a infrastructure point of view.
Perfect. So Aditya, you mentioned optimization, right, and cost reduction. So do you usually see a significant cost reduction in your customer base after they start using Sentalytics?
Um, Absolutely. So I think there are, again, optimization can further be broken down, and at the so you start by something very basic like wastage tracking. What that means is you're looking for orphaned resources, unassociated resources, underutilized resources, and typically about 5 to 7% of your savings should be coming from this kind of optimization. As you move forward, you start looking at right sizing your infrastructure, which basically means, okay, how exactly can I change the size? I love this term of cloud sizing versus infra sizing. See, cloud sizing is not done when you size for the cloud. You don't do it for 5 years. Don't do it for 1 year. You literally do it for 1 month. So you want to make sure that your infrastructure is running correctly for that month, and then the next month you might upgrade it or downgrade it based on the need. Um, so this is a great example of how cloud native companies who have already adopted the cloud are really leveraging its power in the time of COVID. They're very quickly able to shrink down their workload, bring it into a size and scale and cost where it becomes manageable. So right sizing is another critical piece that brings in about 10 to 15% of your optimization. And then lastly, you're looking at RI planning, right? So you're willing to make a long-term commitment, you're willing to commit to reserved instances, and that is going to bring in about 25-30% of savings on average, maybe even more. So all in all, there is a lot you can save on the cloud, which is why we keep emphasizing that it's a marathon and that you got to be continuously taking care of it. It's not something that you do once and then forget about it.
Yes, I've a lot of times I've heard you say that the cloud is a marathon and not a sprint. And on those lines, can you please share some do's and don'ts for the organizations to keep control on their cloud?
I think the first important thing to understand is to make cloud cost management a daily habit. It's not monthly, it's not weekly. We have to get into the habit that every day when you start your day or you end your day, you go into your CMP, you go into your Amazon Azure console and look at, okay, what was my bill today? Because if you're too late, you've already lost the plot. You've already consumed the service. You've already consumed, the infrastructure, and now you got to pay for it. So the first do that, for the first change in habit is to make it something which you do on an ongoing basis. I think the second very critical thing, which is interesting, is the techno commercial nature, which I referred to. So, one of the things I constantly see the struggle with is how do we get finance to understand technology and the tech guys to understand finance? I think the blend is something which is incredibly simple and yet complex at the same time. So I think the very critical component for anybody managing the IT on cloud is to understand that techno-commercial nature of, okay, if I do this change in my IT, how will it actually impact my finance, or how will it actually impact my budgets on it? So these are some of the two key things I would like to maybe focus on if I was to talk about some of the do's and don'ts on running on the cloud.
Wonderful. That was insightful. Uh, and during all of this, which are the most popular services that you are seeing that are being rapidly adopted or are spiking up?
Um, Cloud services are very interconnected. So you cannot really spin up a VM unless you have an IP or you don't have storage or you don't have network. So I wouldn't say that there's a specific service. Yeah, if I was to point out something, we're definitely seeing a very, very high demand for virtual desktops. So basically VDI solutions, workspaces, and all forms of remote enablement. That's from an end user perspective. From a cloud infrastructure and IT server landscape perspective, there's definitely an increase in the lift and shift opportunities. Customers who are in their refresh cycles, cash is king. They don't have the kind of capex that they used to. So now they're talking about moving all those workloads to the cloud. So maybe on one side we're talking about workspaces and virtual desktop softwares, and on the other side we're maybe looking at traditional VMs. Obviously, taking a big spike there.
Wonderful. So we've spoken about what is being happening since the pandemic began and what is happening right now. I want to ask you, as an opinion, as a visionary and an opinion leader, what is to happen tomorrow? So we are stepping into a new world, and what do you think this means in terms of the cloud industry?
Um, well, it's a tough crystal ball to gauge. These are very unprecedented times. You're pretty much making your decisions on a daily basis. The annual plans and the quarterly plans are pretty much irrelevant in these times. But if I was to take a hunch, if I was to make a bet, I would say that in the long run, this is definitely a positive for the cloud industry. I think the cloud industry will only pick up from here. In the short run, you will see the impact of the costs being reduced, of the cloud infrastructure shrinking, companies struggling to run within the IT budgets or within the reduced IT budgets. But in the long run, the adoption will grow, the migration will grow, the digital transformation journeys will grow, and customers will want the scalability. Another key thing we will start looking at is static workloads will start shrinking because a very simple example, if I was running a static workload on the cloud right now, I have no way to shrink it. But if it's an auto scaling dynamic workload, as my need decreases, it automatically would have shrunk down and started reducing my daily spend. So those kinds of things we think will start playing a more important role, and customers will start going more cloud native rather than looking at it as a traditional, data center where they've just hosted their IT. So that would be my guess if I was to make one.
I definitely align with that thought. And Aditya, as a business running on cloud yourself, how do you think cloud technology is going to change our day-to-day lives from an org's perspective?
Well, I think we'll all become more flexible. We'll become more adaptable. We will not be looking too far ahead in the future. I think one of the things that will definitely change with cloud and this pandemic is that we will start looking at how do we do short-term, maybe long-term planning, but with short-term control, if I may say so. So you will want to be able to have that flexibility to say, okay, this is what I want to get to, but in case something goes wrong, how do I dial back the knob and very quickly come back into what is it that I can afford and what are the kind of budgets that I can run within? So I think definitely the way of doing business will change. The expectations will change. Very basic stuff like how often do you go and meet a customer? I think cloud will now focus on digital connectivity, virtual connectivity, and it's really funny how the humanity and the human brains work. We used to often have these conversations about how it's getting all virtual and there's lack of intimacy, lack of physical connect because of social media and all of those digital mediums. And now all of a sudden, again, we're talking about how do we get more virtual and more distant. So these are fun times, these are interesting times. And I think as much as it's a global pandemic, I think everybody's trying to do their best to learn from it and grow out of it. So those are some of, very interesting observations that I've noticed in these days.
Very interesting. And I think I've covered most of my questions. Just to end it at the right note, uh, Centrelix is a CMP. And how do you think a CMP can help businesses to jumpstart their regular days after the pandemic goes down?
Well, I think a CMP right now in the pandemic will be more useful as well, as much as it is after the pandemic. Very simple statement to make would be cash is king. So everybody right now should be conserving capital, conserving liquidity, staying as liquid as possible financially. So a CMP can just plug in and make sure that you're not wasting anything. There's no drainage happening, and you're literally conserving every last penny that you can. So when your business comes back to normal, as the economies start to open, which is what we are seeing across the globe, you will then be able to scale back up a lot quicker because you would have mitigated, reduced as much of your loss as possible in these times. So I think definitely look for whatever works for each company to be able to make sure that this time not a single dollar is getting wasted, be it on IT or any other front for that matter.
That is true. So with this, we're reaching towards the end of this webinar, and I think that was a very immensely valuable session for our audiences. And I'm sure that they have a lot to add to their cloud management strategy after this webinar. So thank you, Aditya. Thanks for being a part of this webinar and guiding our audience through these tough times. And to all our viewers right now who are taken aback from the tectonic shift in your cloud strategy, feel free to reach out to Team Centralytics after this webinar to manage, secure, and optimize your cloud infrastructure during this pandemic. Do you have anything to add to that, Aditya?
No, so thank you so much, Avinash. Thank you so much for organizing this. Really nice being a part of this webinar and sharing a little bit about what we see. Always happy to help anybody that is, in the cloud journey and can use our help. We're always there to help. So thank you once again for setting this up, and really, it was really fun being a part of this.
Thank you. It was great to have you here. Thank you, Aditya. And thank you, everyone. And have a good time. And stay safe.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah.